Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's three Prakim Rambam, Hilchos, Tumas, Meis, Prakim, Yud Beis, Yud Gimel, and Yud Dalet, beginning with Perek Yud Beis. Now, really, all of the three Prakim are going to be dealing with an oil, certainly this chapter and the next in a very direct way. First of all, we have to define, when we speak about the unique power or the Tumah of a mace, to impart Tumah through an oil. So yes, we spoke about the three types of oils, which is when the person is on top of the mace, when the mace is on top of the person or keli. But we're going to be focusing on the third type of oil, where both the mace and an adam, keli, certainly oichlin or mashkin, are under the same oil. How do we define the oil? What is the minimum size of an oil? And as we keep on mentioning, now we're going to learn very strongly, directly about it. The oil cannot be laying directly on top of the tumah. As we're going to see, there has to be at least a space of a tefach, of open air in between the source of tumah and the oil. And when all of these conditions are met, let's become familiar with the words, then the oil will be mevi esatuma. Mevi means it's going to allow for the source of tumah to impart tumah to everything else under the same oil. And also, chaytzetz b'fnei hatuma, chaytzetz would mean that if you have a source of tuma under a covering, if the oil is going to be is going to meet the definitions of an oil, then the tuma won't go above. That means it's going to actually make a chatzitza between the tuma and everything over it. That's going to be the general rules of oil. Maybe and chaytzetz. We will also have some very interesting math in this chapter. Perek Shnei Asar, the 12th chapter, has 8 halachas, beginning with halacha aleph. So here we go. Tefach al tefach meruba, a square tefach, meaning a tefach in the length and a tefach in the width. If it is al rum tefach, if there is an empty space of a tefach over which you have this oil, it's not within the tefach of the source of tumah, then indeed, maybe as a tumah, the oil will enable the source of tumah to impart it, like we mentioned, to anything else under it, as well as the chaytzetz b'fnei tumah. It's going to stop the tumah of furthering going up over the oil, and all that is din toidam she'ein karo oil. And obviously, if it's more than a tefach al tefach, now what you can't have is 2 tefachim on the width of a half a tefach. Well, it's both the length and the width have to have a minimal size of a tefach, as well as the room, the space between has to be minimally a tefach. Ketzad, for example, ketzad min hameis munach la'aver, that's laying in an open space. Ubetzidei, and right near it, you have kalim, and he's just giving examples. If the mace is very small, the kalim are small, just as examples. You have machatim, bitzinoidos, needles, spits, other kalim that are susceptible to becoming tamei v'chayetze b'hem. If the einam legem batuma, if they don't touch the tumah just because they're laying right near it, if the tumah is an open space, they will not acquire tumah. But im heilalem oil. But if on top of both the kazayas and of this needle, you have an oil, you have a covering, and it's also higher off the ground, tefach. That's the word that is a mevi. That's the word mevi asatuma lakelim utameyim, and that's mevi. Now, what's chaytzetz? If you had other kalim on top of the stand, the din is hadeihem tohoidim. Why? That shekeshein shehoil mitama koil shetachtov matzel kol shechutz. It saves everything that's outside of it. It doesn't go beyond the limits of the oil. And the chaytzetz bein atuma or bein akelim shal gabov. Now the truth is saying v'chein hois atuma al gabov. So something tummy on top of it. The kelim are tachtov, same rule. Hakelim tohidim shehoil chaytzetz b'fnei atumah. However, if the oil and the source of tumah are not a part of tefach or more. They are within that. Or if the size of the oil doesn't have the minimum length tefach end with tefach, even though it's higher than the source of tumah by a lot, nevertheless, hakelim shebitzad hatuma are tahirim because it doesn't have the din of an oil. The kelim shelamaylam oil zeh, so it's not maybe, and it's not chaytzes, and therefore kelim that are above this oil. So kol shekeneged hatuma tameh, being that we disregard this oil, it's as if it's not there. So now we go back to the first two types of oil. Here, the case would be that the mace is on the ground and something is going directly above it. It will become tameh. Because these items, sheheilu ala tuma, either is a physical, something that other people might call a covering. Halachically, it's not called the oil. The ancient oil, or in the opposite direction. And the tumah was on top of the oil. Zed, this oil that doesn't have a tefach by a tefach. And kalim are underneath it. Same thing. Kol shekeneged tumah. Anything that's mamish directly underneath the source of corpse tumah will become tameh. Shaharei ha'ila leim, because the corpse tumah was on top of that keli. I have a oil. That oil is not halachically an oil. The ancient oil sheyachitz b'fnei tumah, because shekol pachus mirum tefach kinegiyahu chashuv. And therefore, the tumah shetach of tumah retzutzehi. The word retzutze means flush, adjacent. As now we so clearly spoke out. Now, we are still in the middle of halacha aleph. Another very important qualification to an oil. Let's not speak about what the material of the oil is made out of. Let's speak about what it's not made out of. But if a person or kalim, as we'll define in a moment, not all kalim, but kalim, that shenasu oil ala tumah, that if they are on top of tumah, and bein shohayu hein atzmam oil, if in other words, if I am leaning over both a kezayis min ameis, right? I'm a tefach by a tefach, and also on top of something else. So if I am an oil, or kalim are an oil, or even if a person or kalim are the base of the oil, are the pillars of the oil, as we'll explain in a moment. Then, even though they will be able to allow for the tumah to travel through them or underneath them and impart it in anything else under them. So if you're leaning over an area and under you, you have a piece of a corpse, kazais, enough to be matama ba'oil, and a keli, that keli will become tameh. But the einam choytzitzin b'fnei hatumah, they don't stop the tumah from going directly up. So if there's something else on top of the tumah, even though you are in between Adam or Kalim, or even when Adam and Kalim are only the amudim for an oil, yes, maybe, not chaytzitz. Ketzad. Let's give it. The Rambam is giving, practical things, practical cases that can happen. If you have a luach, if there's a board, and when we're building something and there's some heavy boards, heavy door, heavy wall, 4 people are carrying it and we're walking, right? Or if you have a board, and we stop, we're going to stop and we're going to be mahel ala meis. If you have this board that's placed on top of 4 kalim, even if the kalim themselves are made out of avadim, and as we learned previously, the types of kalim that are b'chalal not susceptible to tumah, like klei avanim, the chayoytz mehem, the kalim she'ein laminam tumah, and the ein sarach loimer, that if you have this luach on top of kalim that are mekabel tumah, munach al arba shkudim or arba konim, even though they have the height of a tefach. In other words, guys, if the oil is not above the source of tefach, it's b'chalal not an oil. Remember that. Chlal not an oil means it won't even be maybe. It won't be chaitzes. Here we're speaking about an oil that has the minimum dimensions. It is a tefach. No, it's tefach by tefach, room tefach. Elama, it's either itself Adam or Kalim, or it's leaning on, it's resting on Adam or Kalim, and Abaho Yotuma v'Kalev Tachtov. Take, it is an oil to be maybe, which means Kalim will be Tameim, but it's not Chaytzeitz. Now listen to this. The Im Hoyu Kalim al Gabov. Before the Rambam spoke about whenever it's not an oil, what above it will become Tamei? Only something that's directly above it. Because the Tuma is Ritzutza and it goes straight up, directly above it. Here it's even worse. It's once this oil is oil enough to be Mevi, so now anything that is on top of any part of this oil, even if it's not directly above the Tuma Chevra, wow, that will also be Tameim. Amazing. In other words, it's as if something is on top of this oil, so the Tuma is to the right, the something is to the top, to the left. It's as if what's on the top is underneath it. It's gewaldig. So the moment you say, in this case, maybe ve'eino chaytzitz, it's not just eino chaytzitz. It actually expands the area of the tuma. The im hoya tuma al gabi luach. If we go in the opposite direction, the source of tuma is over this luach. The issue again is that this luach is resting on other moikelim. The kelim tachtov. Kol kalim shetachas aluach temeim. Kol kalim, same idea. Not only the kalim or adam that are directly under the tuma, because the tuma goes down by kaas v'yoredes. No, anything. It's gavaldik. It's like we invert this oil. Not on top of kalim. Was the moment the oil is not resting on Adam or Kalim. It's resting on Avanim, which cannot be Makabal Tuma, but they're not Kalim, or resting on animals or Chayas. V'hoya Tuma Tachtav. So then, that's the normal din of an oil. Taka Mevi, but it's Chaytzitz. So Hadiyah Kalim She'al Gab after Haydim. Amazing. Halacha Beis. Hoysa Tuma Al Gabov. Now, because here you have a bona fide oil, and the rule is the oil says that Rambam, another rule that clay galolim, clay avanim, clay adama that are very large, as we learned before, right? In Pedek Vav, very large means that it can contain 40 saw of lach or more. They have a din of an oil, which is good, and not like kalim, because again, the word is that Adam or kalim, they being the oil, they being the support of the oil is oil enough to be mevi, which is bad, but it cannot be chaytzitz. Here, like you have a clay adam, you would argue clay adam is the chakeli. No. The Rambam says that these type of kalim for these dinim are not considered kalim, and therefore, if the oil is tefach al tefach bedum tefach, not only is it maybe, but also the upside chaytzis in b'fnei atuma. Wow, halacha yom neser aboard shu nasun al pi tanur chadash, that it's resting flat on top of a new tanur. The question is a tanur a keli or not? And it extends on all of the sides, a tefach or more. And you have tuma under the beam. So what did we just learn? We just learned that if an oil is a keli, or if it's resting on a keli, it cannot be chaytzis. So here it is chaytzis. Good. Kelim shal gabav is the haydim. Or in the other direction, also chaytzis. If the tuma is al gabav, kelim shatach of the haydim. Why? Because a tanur chadash, it was never fired up to be used as a tanur, does not have a din of a kelim. So it's an oil. However, the moment it was used even only once, now this tanur becomes a keli, and as we just learned, this amazing halachem that whenever an oil is resting on a keli, even though it's maybe, but it's not chaytzitz. Halacha dalet. Neser shu nasan al pishnei tanurim. If you have a board that's placed over two ovens, now we're speaking about old ovens, so forget about chaytzitz, but it's going to be maybe. And it's extending from both opposite sides. So now you have a bonafide. Forget about chayt. It's not going to be chayt, but it's going to be maybe. So like this. So tuma tachtov ben shnei tanurim. The tuma that's in between these two ovens and any other item in between the two tanurim, that taka will become tamei because it's an oil that's maybe as a tuma. What are we getting at? But again, you have two ovens, and you have a board that's going on top, but it's extending, it's going beyond the limits. So we say that the tanur is like a wall, even though it's sharing the same oil. But if the tuma is in between the ovens, and you have an adam or keli or anything else that is susceptible to becoming tamei, on the other side, on the outermost sides, they're not considered to be under the same oil. In other words, the ovens themselves create a separation. And this indeed is going to be a topic that we're going to learn more in Perek Yud Daled. We already spoke it out before. Like you have today big buildings. If you have two in one room on the same story, the adjacent room is not considered to be under the same oil because there's a wall that intervenes in between them. Well, again, afilu yashin means that as we learned in Beis and in Aleph and in Beis, it's not going to be chaytzitz, but it's going to be an oil to be maybe. But the yotzim is a tefach the tuma b'tzad zeh, you don't even have to have two tanurim. You can have one tanur. So you have a board. If the board is larger than all of the tanur, there can be items that are on the same side of the same wall of the oven. They will become tummy. But if you have the source of tuma on one side of the oven and an item on the other side of the other wall of the oven, again, that's also considered to be in two different rooms. The tanur is a separation. Kalim shubetzad hasheni artohoidim. What's tanur is mafsik. Tanur is not chaytzitz. So for speaking about going up or down, it doesn't create a chatzitza. That's the word. But as far as a wall is concerned, that type of chatzitza, even a keli, which is the tanur yashin, is able to affect. Halacha Adam shenasa keli. If a person is carrying a keli, just as an example, a mardas is probably gives us mardei. A person is carrying a plow. Point is that a plow, in some of it or in most of it, has the width of a tefach. For sure, it has the length of a tefach. It's very long, but it also has the width of a tefach. So a person is, now again, when a person carries an oil, I know that this oil is not going to be chaytzitz, but it's going to be maybe. The plow is very long. It could happen that one part of this madeya is over a kazais basum and ames. So now we want to make sure that taket has the width. It has the width of a tefach. So the din is im hoya behekei foy tefach. If the circumference is of a tefach, now really we need to have the width. Now we're going to learn more, or we're going to go over here that even though it's not exact, Chazal uses the approximate pi. That if you have something that has a circumference, if you want to know what its diameter is, it's be'erach a third. We're going to go with that cheshbon. Okay, now guys, a tefach, when we speak about a tefach, we're speaking about 4 etzba'os, right? So a third of that will be 1 1/3, right? 1 1/3 times 3 is be'erach 4 fingers. So if the circumference is of a tefach, even though it means really the diameter is only pi, around a third, and you would argue you need to have a tefach here. First of all, the person is also under the plow; it's on one shoulder. So, and part of the plow went over a source of tuma. the person becomes tamei. Umevi leituma midivreyam. You don't have the diameter of a tefach. So here the Rambam says it's a midrabanan and it's a gzeira. Shegozru al sheyesh be'kefrei tefach, because mishum sheyesh berach betefach. If you're going to have a madeya, which is going to have the circumference of around 3 tefachim, which means it does have the diameter of a tefach, that's a bona fide oil, even though again it's resting on a person. It's not an oil to be chaytzitz, but it's an oil to be maybe. So gozru this because of that. Aval einoi maybe esatuma lakelam shetachtav. But this gezeda, very good, was only for the adam. Ulashar adam shiyai laleim ba'alatuma. Right? It's only for adam. But only for the guy that's carrying it. Nor ulashar adam shiyai laleim alatuma achiyel boy. Gewaldig. And now let's hold this thought of pi for a moment. But let's go weiter. Now think about it. An aron. So says the Rambam, an aron shalates, which is common in certain areas, shamanichen bohen es ames, does not have a din of a kever, which is huge. What's the din of a kever, my friends? As we learned, even though the mace, if you have a mausoleum, a building that was built, even a small structure, over the burial, over a grave. So what we said was, fakert, even though there you have this chalol tefach, so normally you would argue that's mafsik mipnei hatuma. Kever does not. Kever does not mafsik mipnei hatuma. I'll tell you more than that. If you touch the outer walls, the outside walls of a kever, or if there's an overhang that goes beyond the outer wall of any side of such a kever, you will become tamei if you touch it or if you go underneath it. Not so with an aron. An aron is not a building. Fakert. Now, avol or ella im yesh bein kisu aron v'hameis goyva tefach chaytzitz. An aron, if you have a goyva tefach, so then the advantage is you have a bona fide oil. So not only does the outer walls not have the power to impart tumah because it ain't no dinah kekever, but l'chayra, think about it. If you put a mace in a casket, if you have a halal tefach, so now and at the top of the casket is a tefach by a tefach, so it should completely save the tumas oil. The ha'omer al gabi ha'oren indeed is taught by Torah law. However, but midrabanan v'afal pishurev aron is yesh halal tefach. Another derabanan, hoyel, another after the plow halacha, hoyel the yesh she'ein sham halal tefach. There are times, let's say you have a very large person. You know, today here everything is standardized, everything is made by machines. So a very large person won't have a full tefach between their bodies and the cover. And over there, itaka won't have a din of an oil, which means that the tumah is retzutza. So gazru al kol aroyne she'ein chaytzitzin midrabanan, meaning that if someone goes on top of the aron, it's as if they touched the mace or a kever. Now, they didn't say that the aron, even midrabanan, has a din of a kever. That not. You understand? So the outer walls of the aron is not going to be metame. But the top of the aron is not chaytzeitz. It's like tuma ritzutza. Well, halacha zay. Koira shinasuna mekoisa lakois. You have a beam. Beam is being held up by walls. This is important again because, as we learned in the beginning in halacha aleph and halacha beis, that if an oil is being held up by adam or kalim, it's only like part oil. It's maybe, but the eino chaytzitz. This is a bona fide maybe the chaytzitz potential. So im yesh by peseach tefach, then maybe it's hatuma kula tachas kula, which means v'chol adam kalim adam shetachtel tamei. What's the chiddush? The chiddush is like this: that it's shaykh to have a beam that not all of it has the width of a tefach. Some of it, you know, sometimes when the beam goes into the wall, so they narrow it down. The vart is that all of the beam is considered an oil. Some of it, the Rambam is saying, some of it is going to be less than a tefach. Is considered to be mitzas oil. In other words, kalim that are under even the part that's not wide a tefach, it's all long a tefach, it's one big beam, is also going to become acquired tuma if you have a mace under any other part of the beam. But if the entirety of the beam or the roiv of the beam doesn't have the width of a tefach, so then it's as if it's not there. And tuma now, many beams are not squares. Many beams are round. And forget about the plow. I know that by a plow, the Chachamim made that gezeiram because most plows with Tama had a circumference of 3 tvachim. All right, so let's just put that aside. Now let's go back. It's not about the circumference. In other words, if you have something circular, if you were to put a thread and put it all the way around and to measure it, it will become big. It's not about the circumference. It's only about the real width. And again, the cheshbon that we make in halacha, the approximated pi is a third. This man, shehi agula, if it's round and it is of 3 tvachim, so you make it divided by a third. Now, what happens if you have a big box? It has to have 4 tvachim. That's avada. Because think about it. In other words, the Rambam was trying to say is that you don't add the circumference. If you have a box, if you have a square, 4 tvachim means each side is a tefach, which is what you need. You don't even care about the verticals. You care about the horizontals. That the horizontal, what's laying on top of you, has the width of a tefach. And now the final halacha is going to be gewaldig. Rambam is going to address 2 things with details. One will be if you have a barrel and you have a source of tuma and something else in the barrel. Now, when we speak about a barrel, whoever can see, I'm holding up a cup. We're not speaking about a barrel that's standing upright, because then the topic will be, does the cover of the barrel have tefach by tefach? We're not speaking about that. And it's very easy to just measure the width. We're speaking about a barrel that's laying on its side. So a couple of things. First of all, even though it's one barrel, we consider the top part an oil. We don't say it's like a barrel. How is it an oil? It's called an oil. But what you need to have that from the ground, which would be if the barrel is laying on the ground proper, from the ground until the widest part of the height of this barrel on the side, which is in the middle, you have to have a tefach, and the width should be weiter a tefach. Rum tefach, tefach al tefach. Now, the Rambam is going to describe the minimum circumference of such a barrel that will give you that share. People are going to say, "Verstehst the whole thing? Just give me a barrel that's 3 tfachim circumference." Because when you lay it on the side, we just said pi, 3 tfachim is 3 tfachim is a tefach. But that cheshbon won't work. As we'll see, because since the tefach by a tefach has to be berum tefach, the cheshbon is going to be, as we're going to start inside halacha ches. So he's giving a barrel of the size of a saw, which was probably a typical size of a barrel. Shimut al tzida ba'aver. So it's laying in open air space. That's very important, because if this saw is laying in a room, right, that's a whole other topic. We're speaking about that we need for the barrel itself to be the oil. And we're speaking about a case where there's something tummy in it and there's something else in it. It can be a very long barrel. These 2 items are not touching each other. The only way one will become tummy from the other is if you're going to have tumas oil. So, what is the minimum circumference size of this barrel? Listen to this numbers, guys. Around 4.5 tvachim. Now, what I would like to do over here, when we speak about the rum tefach, let's just make tvachim, Danny, into fingers, and everything will be very easy math. Okay? How much is 1 tefach? 4 fingers. 4 fingers. So let's go like this. 4.5 tvachim circumference is going to be how many fingers? 4 times 4.5, 18 fingers. Okay? Tefach is 4 fingers. Now, in order, kedei sheyia goiva hatzad ha'elyon tefach u'mechza, we need. See, guys, if you would have, let's go to the not to the circumference, Danny, but to the diameter. When you have 18 fingers, which is what Rambam is saying you need, what now will be the diameter? What's the diameter of 18 fingers? I'm going to go with the third, 6 fingers. Because when you have it on the side, it's 6 fingers. If it's a barrel, so if it's 6 fingers wide, which is more than what we need, that's a tefach and a half, right? That's a tefach and a half. It's also 6 fingers tall. Where is the barrel the widest? In the middle. Speaking about diameter, don't confuse circumference and diameter. So if it's 6 fingers tall, what's the center, Danny? 3 fingers. 3 fingers is less than a tefach. I just want to speak out the problem over here. When you have something that's 18 fingers in circumference, it means its diameter is a third. Now, we don't need the whole third. You can say, why do we need 6 fingers? We only need 4 fingers. I'll tell you why. Because
you only need 8 fingers, you say.
No, you need only 4 fingers.
4.
No. You only need 4 to have the long side you have. But you only need 4.
Right.
Problem is, if you would not have the 6 fingers, it works perfect in this year. Because the point we're trying to make is that when you're going up the ground, if you're measuring this from the top of the ground, you need to have a tefach. A tefach is 4 fingers. When you have a diameter that's 6 fingers, then the widest part is only 3 fingers above the ground. The good thing is that 3 fingers above the ground, you have a tefach and a half. You have 6 fingers. If you would be, but because 3 fingers are not enough, you have to have 4 fingers above the ground. So when the higher up you go, the narrower the barrel gets on the top. So if in the center you have 2 extra fingers, instead of the 4 that you need, you have 6, which is what you have off the ground. Off the ground to the middle is not enough, because off the ground to the middle is only 3. You have to have 4 fingers. When you go up the additional finger, if in the center you're going to have 6 fingers, when you go up 1 finger, you're still going to have the 4 fingers needed. You only have the width of the tefach off the ground of tefach if you begin with the 18 fingers, which is 4.5 tefach. That's the cheshbon of the Rambam.
Just to clarify, once you have that barrel that's lying on its side,
then anything in it, if there's a kazais when a mace inside one part of the barrel, anything else that's in any other part of the barrel, inside of it will become tamei because it's in an oil. Tumas oil. So why? When you lay it on the side and you are measuring it off the ground and you want to know what the widest part of the barrel, which is exactly middle of the barrel, is going to be, like we said, 6 fingers. And the Rambam just writes tvachim, a tefach and a half. Now, why do we need a tefach and a half? I only need a tefach shkoyach, because this tefach and a half, Danny, is only going to be when you are 3 fingers above the ground. 3 fingers above the ground is not where we're measuring. We have to begin measuring it when you are another tefach higher. When you are a tefach higher, the widest has the 6 fingers. But we need to have, when you are measuring it, a tefach above the ground. If you have 3 fingers, again, tefach and a half, when you go up more, even though it's narrower, it's still going to be the 4 fingers, the tefach. When you go up more than the middle, you will still have the tefach, the tefach. The Rambam writes a big chiddush. And that big chiddush is, guys, listen, you're speaking about 2 things that are in the barrel. When we speak about measuring from the ground, you know what the awesomeness is? I don't care that the bottom barrel has a floor that's holding something in it. I don't care about that. I need for this oil to be above the ground, the tefach. Why do I have to have a barrel that has behekefoi, has in the circumference the 18 fingers to come to the shear? Because I'm measuring it from the bottom. Like we mentioned, If you already placed this barrel 2 fingers above the ground, chatzi tefach above the ground, even if the circumference, right, 3 tefachim, the point will be is that when you measure it off the ground, not off the bottom of the barrel, you don't have to go up, like we mentioned before, another finger. You are already there. If the barrel is suspended on 2 things that are holding it up, and if the center of the barrel, when it's a tefach above the ground, has the width of a tefach, then that barrel will also be maybe asatuma to anything else in it. Wow. Why did we need to have for this barrel to be a lot more than the tefach? We're saying the barrel has to be 4.5 by 4.5. Really, I only need 3 tefachim, because 3 tefachim, the pi, the erech is 1 tefach, is because since, like we explained, because the barrel, if it's the pi is the width and the height. Half of it, which is the widest, is only half. So half of 3, like as we explained, is not going to be a fully tefach off the ground when you're going to have the right tefach. But if the whole barrel is suspended above the ground, then we can count that height. And therefore, the circumference of the barrel only has to be a total of 3, and you don't need for it to be a 4.5. Maybe it's too long. Now we're going to have another scenario. And this scenario in the Rambam, my friends, is not speaking about a hollow barrel, which is why we spoke about a barrel where the source of Tumah and the item that might become Tumah is in it. Now we're speaking about a pillar. Truth be told, the same thing can be with the barrel. The point of the pillar is that there's nothing in it. How can a pillar, and a pillar is laying on the side, how can a pillar become an oil? Now, very simple, because the pillar is not a box. So it's something rounded. So if something is stuck outside of the pillar, but all the way in the corner where it's touching the ground, if you look on top of it, it's going to be covered with the outer part of the middle pillar. Here we have to make a cheshbon. How big does the circumference of the pillar have to be for us to have in that little corner, either on this side or on that side, to use that circular pillar as tefach wide, and that tefach wide has to be a tefach above the ground. You can have a tefach width, but it can be lower, won't be good. For you to say that if you have a kazais and a basar stuck into one side, and in the length of it, something else is stuck on the other side, the outer part of the pillar will serve as an oil. That's it. And here you have to have not only the cheshbon of pi, again, the general third, you have to have another cheshbon, which is that when you have a square, that we will make a imaginary square around the circle, what will be the diameter of the square? I think we just spoke about yesterday of Mishnaysen by a suk. In other words, if you have a tefach by a tefach, or 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, the diameter will be bigger. And as we'll see, you have to use that formula, because when you have a circular pillar, for us to say that there is an oil of a tefach, we have to make this imaginary square around it. Now, you have an amud. Now, guys, if this pillar is in a room, forget about the pillar serving as an oil. That's the Rambam's point. Anything that is, under the pillar is going to impart tumah to anything else in that entire room. But no. The pillar is in the open air. The pillar has to be the oil. And it's laying on the ground. You cannot consider its wall. You got the wall. The wall is like an oil. The outer, the circumference on the side, it can be called a wall, but it can also serve as a oil. Here, the circumference has to be at least 24 tvachim. Very unlike the barrel. The barrel only has to be 4 tvachim and a half, because there you're going in it. Here you have to use that little corner outside of it. So therefore it won't be considered an oil, and therefore the halach will be tumah bekasven bekasven yeredis. It won't impart it. It won't be maybe, and it won't be chaytzes. So if something is directly over it, even though begashmi is the pillar is blocking it, it doesn't do anything. Now, how did we get to the number 24? Now, guys, let's make a cheshbon again. Let me go to the diameter. Danny, what's the diameter of 24? A third is an eighth. Guys, let's wake up. Okay, is 8. Was you have to 8? You kidding me? You only need to have 1 tefach. No. It's based on the following 2 rules. Rule number 1 is, and approximation is the way Chazal do it. So again, if you have a diameter of 24 tefachim, really, if you were to measure the width of this pillar that's on the sides, the real width is 8 tefach. Now hold on. Why do we need to have the 8 tefachim? Because we have another rule that kol sheyesh tefach al tefach b'ribuah. If you have 1 by 1 and you're going to measure the diagonal, yesh ba'alach soinoi tefach shnei chumsh. Now, guys, let me do like this. Let me just bring this cheshbonis. If you have 8 tefachim, again, I know it's 24. 24 is the circumference, but it's 8. If you have a line that's 8 and you make a box around it, right, you're going to end up, the 8 will be from one wall to the other. But if you're going to make it a diagonal, you're going to have 11 tefachim. And we need to have that share of 11 tefachim. Now, whoever is using a chayenu, unlike the Rambam La'am, the chayenu gave a gavaldic picture. Whoever's looking at the chayenu, maybe if Kevin can put it up here, what are we looking for, guys? You know what we're looking for? We want something that's in location D. Something that's in location D will have a full tefach of a roof, and it's still, and that roof that you're creating as into a tefach will be a tefach above the ground. And that's only, okay, if you're beginning, the difference between the 8, you know the difference between the 8 and the 11? The 8 is the circle. The 11, the box, how does something fit in there? Something fits in there because since it's laying on the ground, so you have under the curvature, you have that location where there's such an empty space. That's where something can be. Only when you begin with 24 tefachim, called the funny that is where you can have that. If you are in area D, you can make this imagine. It's not an imaginary. What you're doing is like bringing down the line in the middle. You're bringing it down for it to fit there. It has to fit in the open space, and it has to be above the ground. The tefach. Shecheshboinus elu is Bikedo saying that Rambam writes that really the emes of math is not exact. The truth is, I just want to tell you that if you have a circle that's 8, if you make a box around it, it's not going to be 11 tefachim. It's really going to be 11 tefachim and a fifth. But we approximate it. For you to have the tefach mal tefach, arum tefach, you have to begin with that number, or obviously more. And if it's anything less than that, then it doesn't have the room tefach. Okay, we're moving on to today's second chapter. As we mentioned, really, this chapter, Vaitin, continues with oil. It's amazing. So aside of the exception that the Rambam spoke about in Perek Yud Beis, that if the oil is Adam or Kalim, not all Kalim, but some Kalim, or if it's leaning on a pillar, the oil is leaning on Adam or some Kalim, it's maybe the Enochoitzitz. Aside of that exception, the rule is, again, if an oil is Tefach al Tefach and there's a space between the tum and the oil, the ground and the oil, you have a tefach, it's going to be maybe v'choitzes. The Rambam in this chapter is going to speak about a concept of not every oil follows that rule. There's something called an oil ru'ua, which means an unstable oil. And ultimately, the Rambam is going to make a sikkum of the normal oil that's maybe v'choitzes. You're going to have an oil that's maybe ve'eino choitzes. Again, that I know that detail we learned in the Perek Yud Beis. You're going to have an oil that's loy maybe v'loy choitzes, and you're going to have even an oil that's choitzes. Wow. But really, that's already going to be the intro to the next chapter. That's when the oil is really on the side, as we'll see in this chapter. Perek Shlosh Asan has 8 halachas. Let's begin. Kol tefach al tefach burum tefach, as we learned in the previous chapters, that's called an oil. And therefore, the two general dinim is v'choitzes mipnei atuma, which is a leniency, and the chumre is maybe asatum. Now, bein sha'asu lahayil, whether someone made this for an oil or whether it happened by itself, afilu shaloi bidei adam, doesn't matter if it needs these measurements. For example, what's an oil that happened by itself? He says a choyed, if you have you have a hole in a rock. What made it? Animals made it. The water beat into it. The fact is that in there you have a rock. You have an opening. Whether something, it means something salty, corroded it, or whether it means that there was the earth itself cratered, it was like an earthquake. Doesn't matter how it happened. Oi, listen to this. Or if a person gathered avanim or beams, person gathered it just to store a bunch of stones, but he put it in such a way that in there's an opening. Right? Oil and both. Maybe the chaytzitz.
Maybe the chaytzitz are not opposite.
No, maybe under we have to. You can maybe under it and chaytzitz on top of it. Yeah. No. Aval oil ra'ua, an unstable oil, which is something which we find a lot, as we'll see in a moment, branches of a tree that are blowing around. Then, guys, maybe as a tumah, it's bachlal, not an oil. Aval midivrei seifrim. The chumra part here, maybe as a tumah, but the eino chaytzitz. For example, this is a real example that happens very often. Sorigei ha'ilonos, branches of trees, sheseichin al aretz. They're full of trees that are, they're hanging over the earth. And this is what Chazal is referring to when they use the word sechachois. Or, if you have certain stones that are projecting out from a wall, which are also hasoichois al haaretz, they are called piraois. Why will the piraois be considered unstable? Because don't think about modern building with the solid 770 stones. We're speaking about the whole wall to begin with is not that gavaldic. And the stones that are sticking out, the stones are very weak with me. If they're strong enough, that if someone were to put a ceiling over it, other people say it means putting plaster on it, that you can build something on it and they would be able to hold it up. No, that's not called ra'ua. That's called a stable oil. Therefore, so if this stone has a tefach by tefach, if you have underneath it a kazayis b'sara mace, you have underneath it, I know it's little, a needle, a little keli, it will become tummy. But if you were to put anything on it, they would collapse. Think about branches of a shvacha tree. If you put something on it, the branch would give in. Such types of branches. Then, like we said, midoy raisa, it's nothing. It's nothing. Not maybe not chaytz. It's midrabanan. Harei lo meviim midivrei v'ero chaytz mechin chochay yetzulas. Halacha again. Elo meviim v'chaytzitzin. Let's give examples of again your normal oil. Klei eitz haba b'mido. This is important, guys. Didn't we learn in the last chapter that a keli is maybe and not chaytzitz? Yes, my friends, that's a keli. A klei eitz haba b'mido. It goes both ways. What did we learn in Perek Vav? That a clay is above a midah means it was made to be stationary. It means it's big enough to contain 40 saw of liquid. Since it was made to be stationary, you know what? It never becomes tummy. It's like a building. It's mamish like an oil. Taka maybe v'chaytzitz. And we also learned this in Perek Yud Beis, even though we said as a rule that kalim that are the oil or are a base to the oil, maybe the eino chaytzitz. What are the exceptions? Klei avanim, klei galolim, klei hadama haboim b'mida. Pshutei klei oir, simple leather kalim means a piece of leather that does not have a receptacle. They are flat. The yeriya v'sodin u'mapetz u'machatzelas. Or, a curtain, a sheet, a reed mat, which are made for an oil. Ubehemois oichayas. Now, how can many behemoths join to become an oil for the area underneath it? That's if their mom is joined together. How do you, what's joined together? If their mom is, the one person's head is in between the other one's legs, and therefore they are right now in a position of dvukais. Or a bird that's resting. No. If you have a grain heap and the sun is beating, what do people do? They would make a hole in the grain heap for stays. It's very cheap. You're not ruining anything. And right now you're protected from the sun. We're speaking obviously that the roof is tefach al tefach and it's off the ground. The tefach, right? Any food that's not yet mukhshar, they're not susceptible to tumah. That oil is maybe v'choitzes. Now, the Rambam is introducing a big rule that the moment the oil itself becomes tamei, it cannot be choitzes. The moment the oil itself, that's why he's giving all examples of items that don't become tamei for it also to be choitzes. Food that's not yet mukhshal like kabel tumah. If it was made wet,
a living animal can't become.
that's why he said the living animals. Okay, good. No. If it was after it was harvested, if it was never made wet, or in other words, Yirakas that continuously grow. The point is that they are like trees. They're not mekabel tumah that you want them to be in the ground. So therefore, they are mevi'im v'chaytzitzin. What type of vegetables are vegetables that you want for them to be in the ground for a very long amount of time, like erois, mint, bakisoim, bindweed. Let's even find a picture for that. Yarkois, chamoid, wild gourd, udalasi yavanis, and Greek squash. Now, furthermore, chen, hasachochois, haparois, what we just learned in the previous halacha, right? And zizin are other types of stone protrusions or projections, balconies, all of these types of items that are sticking out of a wall, we're speaking about that they are not ru'ah, as we learned before, that if you were to put a roof on it or plaster on it, it would not collapse. They are all mevi'im v'chaytzitzin. Now let's go weiter. Halacha daled the elo mevi'im, which is chamor, but they're not chaytzitz. Ha'adam, as we mentioned in Perek Yud Beis, is if I lean over because I smell a mace and I'm leaning over a keli, I create an oil. But for anything that's on top of me, I don't stop it. And it's even worse, as we learned in the previous chapter. Anything on top of any part of me now. Clay she'enam boim b'midah. Anyway, b'midah means yeah. The clay eights. Anyway, b'midah means that the keli itself became tamei, right? B'pnei she'en kachala kelim, and therefore they become right with achirik u'mistamim. Now, pshutei klayar. Now we learned before in halacha gimel pshutei klayar. So don't stop here. You won't understand. Pshutei klayar. The area of the southern mapas themselves that are not made as an oil. You stretched it out, but the eilehem shipua ve'ein sham kaisalim. Okay, that does not stop the oil from going up because this was not made to serve as an oil. Or now, Danny, you said beheman chaya while they are living, we learn cannot be tumah. But once they die, you're kidding, they are a source of tumah. And as we said, this big cloud, that something that is tamei can never be chaytzitz. The oichalin tameim, or even if they're not tameim already, but they are mukhsharim. Now, if something is mukhshar, it's already wet. When that becomes the oil on top of a mace, now it became tamei. None of that will be chaytzitz. Mevi'im, yes, chaytzitz not. Shadavar tamei ain't a chaytzitz. That's the cloud that we learn in this chapter. Now, urachayim shal yad, a hand mill, is b'chlal kelei avanim. And what did we learn in Perek Yud Beis? This Gavaldik halachem, even though it doesn't become tamei. Adam and Kalim nevi'in ve'enam chaytzitzin. And I know Perek Yud Beis, it's not all the Kalim. It does not include the clay galolim, clay adama. Harei elam nevi'in ve'enam chaytzitzin. Gavaldik halachem. Gotta remember these rules. The elu loy mevi'im v'loy chaytzitzin. It's as if it's not there. Azuroyim, v'hayirakois that are still connected to the ground. The only exception is again the four that we mentioned in halacha gimel, right? The eirois, kisoim, yarkois, chamar, dalas yavamis. Kipas habarad, a mound of hail, right? You think about it. Wow, what did we learn in the previous chapter, right? Regarding the pillar. If it has a circumference, what did we say, Danny, of 24 tefachim? What happens if there's a big mound of hail and somehow it's creating an oil? It's going to melt. I know that. Right? It's called ra'ua, or snow, or hakefoy, sleet, glid, ice, melach, salt. No, all of these things are not proper oils. They're gonna collapse. Or what happens when a person is serving as an oil, but when he is completely off the ground, in other words, you're jumping, while both of your feet are off the ground, you flew over Ekazayis Basara and Amaze, and under you there was a psakelim. Or a bird, not when the bird is resting, when it's poideyach, or a talis nefes, when a talis is blowing in the wind, so it's not stationary. There'll be a moment where the wind was so strong that it went more horizontally, and then it was mahil on a mace and on a keli. Usfina, while the sfina is moving in the sea, kol elu are nothing and nothing. Just like we began this chapter by learning the din of an oil ru'ua, that's chat ru'ua. Ain't oil amaskayim. Allah chavav. If the ship was tied, or if kavash kanaf atalas be'evan, you have this thing, you're drying out your talis, and the wind is making it flap. But what you did is you affixed, you took the tzitziyos and you tied it. So now, is it moving? It's moving like the walls of a sukkah, but that's not called moving. It's basically affixed in a place, not moving a lot. Then, but what is the Rambam also saying? It's not chaytzitz. Why is it not chaytzitz? We have an halacha daled. Because you put it there to dry, you didn't put it to be mahil. If you didn't put a sadin to be mahil, that's the din of mevi'in v'loy chaytzitzin. Halacha zayin nesed. If you have a board that's floating on the water, what did we say before about a ship? Also not moving. Right? As we just explained in halacha hey, and final halacha ches of this chapter. Now this is big. Now I want to already give an intro to Perek Yud Daled. Until now, guys, whenever we spoke about oil, we were speaking about something that's over or under in a horizontal position, in a laying position, Tuma. And oil would mean this type of oil that anything, let's go, the normal oil. You have a covering, which is on top of a corpse, or enough of a corpse that's mitame ba'oil, and it's on top of something else. Now we're speaking about if you have two rooms, and even though Tuma, and like we said before, a while back, that if you have two rooms, there's one roof to the building, but there are walls that are separating one room from room number two. If you don't have an opening between one room and the other, as we'll describe in more details in the next chapter, just because there is tuma under the roof of room A, and the same roof, same boards are going over room B, the tuma won't go through the wall. If you have an opening, and we're going to learn in the next chapter, 3 halachas of openings. How big does the opening have to be? If it's halachically an opening, the tumah goes through. What we're learning over here in halacha ches, in this chapter, the type of tumah that has this chatzitza, which is a kula, and it's not maybe, it's because we're not speaking about an oil on top. We want to know what's considered the closed wall. So sometimes there's going to be like a net, or there's going to be like a screen. We're going to get more details also in the next chapter. There are openings in it, but it's not considered opening halachically. So it's chaytzet, not allowing the tumah to go from one room into the other room, even though the hole in the wall meets the shear of an opening, as we'll learn in the next chapter. So maseches perusa, these are the threads of the woof. Okay, these are relatively thicker threads. Chavile mita, today you have what you call a box spring. In other words, when you put the mattress down, it's on top of a box. Then what they had the bed frame. We have many chazals about this, how they did it. And they would have these thick ropes that they would weave back and forth. And on top of that, they would put the straw mattress, whatever they had them. These types of ropes, again, they're not laying horizontally over the mace, they are closing and opening between two rooms. That's all of these cases. Or v'hamash peilois, some sort of net that the ropes of this net is wide enough, that is thick enough to hold fertilizer. And certain type of lattice shades that they had then in the windows, the commonality is that these are relatively thick ropes. There's space in between them. But nevertheless, they're chaytzitz. Now the Rambam has to clarify, what does chaytzitz mean? So again, you'll see over here, not that if it was on top. No. Chaitzin means only if you have a window in between two houses or two rooms. And again, we're going to learn about this, God willing, soon. There is a minimum size that the window has to meet. It met that size. Not a window with glass. Window means an opening. They didn't have glass as we have it right now, which means that Tuma in one room passes through. And since there is a roof, anything in the other room will also become tummy. But now you went ahead and you put these ropes in the window frame. One of these items that we said was extended in the window space, and that, so to say, closed it. Now, is it a physical steamer? No. Air passes through, okay? That's the meaning of chaytzitzin. And therefore, and now, even on that, you have to add another qualification. That you can't have an open space. Again, the Rambam only was describing the thickness of these materials, whether it is the rope, whether it is the net. But the Rambam didn't describe, like when you weave it on the bed. I'm sure there were different techniques. Like how much space do you have within the ropes? If in any other place you're going to have the size of a tefach by a tefach, as we see in the next chapter, that's one of the shiurim that defines a chaloin. So let's say we don't say the din of lavud like we have by other mechitzas, right? Like when you build a sukkah, I can have a peseach tefach. I have no problem with that. And that's a halachically 1,000% lechatchila dik wall. Even by Erev, when we learned the bigger kul, you don't even have to have it shasi or Erev. You can have it only going in one direction. Not for this. Here, it's about the thickness of the rope. If it's too thin, it's not chashuv. But even though there's a thickness, you cannot have, even in one place, a tefach by tefach opening in between. Because that becomes its new own chaloin. And we'll see in the next chapter, again, one of the three shiurim that is important will be the tefach by tefach. Okay.
Window screens qualify?
Window screens don't have a tefach by tefach. That's a great example. Kevin. A window screen will be a chatzitza.
But are you saying that the material of the screen would be too thin?
No, because I think the window screens that we have are very strong. They're metal. They were unable to do it then. A window screen is a great example. That's called chaytzitza. Now, if you would have the window screen on top, it's not an oil. It's not considered an oil to be maybe. If you have it on the side, well, you know what? I take it back. A maybe. It could be, will be maybe. If it was made with oil, it would be maybe. Here, the word is, it's chaytzitzin. It's not maybe because nothing is underneath it. People say, wow, chaytzitzin is a kula. Chaytzitzin and a maybe is just in this, it's not a normal oil. Okay, now, Gavaldik, now this mamish, this beauty, the Seder of the Rambam, this leads us into Perek Yudalad, which will be again, how does Tuma travel from one room to the other? Obviously, guys, we're speaking about, I'll tell you even more than that. If you have a window in a house, and what did we learn before? We learned that even if there's a mace inside, if there's a door through which you're planning to bring the mace, the Tuma doesn't travel outside the window. But hold on. What happens if over the window, Danny, there's a little bit of a roof? So there will be times that the Tuma does go through it, and it's going to create a Tuma. Halacha, Perek Arba Asr has 7 halachas. Halacha, Ein Tuma nichnesses le'oil v'lo yoytz memenu. Not enter nor exit if the opening between this room and the adjacent room that has a Tuma in it under an oil is less than a tefach al tefach. Now, we're just beginning. Guys, you'll see again in this chapter that there are going to be 3 different shiurim. One, the ikir is a tefach al tefach. Ketzad, for example, chaloim shebin bayis labayis. Oy shebin bayis laliyah. I don't care, Danny, if the chaloin is vertical or if the chaloin is horizontal. Think about then that people used to have a second story. You know how people used to go from the first story to the second story many times? They would put a ladder inside the bottom floor and they would go up, or they would put it on, they would go up straight. And there is an opening. If that opening is less than a tefach by a tefach, even though it's not closed with anything, the tumah cannot go through it. Im yesh boy tefach al tefach meruba. Tefach al tefach meruba means that it's not the sum total. You can't say, well, I have 2 tefach long and a half a tefach wide. That's not going to do it. The length and the width, each one must be at least a tefach. Since you have such an opening, automatically have bias. However, on the other side, when do we say the shir of tefach by tefach? If this window was made in order for people to use it, meaning I want to have a way how to pass items from here to the other. It's about allowing things to travel from one environment to the other. That's the meaning of tashmish. And what are we excluding? Many times you make an opening in a wall, or if you make what they call today a sunroof, you make an opening only for light to go through. Then a much lesser opening will be chashuv for that function, and it's also going to be considered an opening, and therefore the tumah will travel through. Meaning, there it's much smaller. The size is the size of the coin that's called a pudyain. Now I want you to know he brings here in the Chayin on footnote number 1 from Gavaldik that some people understand that the pudyain is a very small size. He calls it even the size of a drill bit. Wow. Because that's enough. That's the power of light. A little bit of light, lightens up a lot of darkness. And therefore, for example, guys, you have this little hole. Why is there a hole in the wall? Because people wanted for natural light to go into the room. Now that this is considered an area through which the tumah goes out, now guys, a halka, then if I touch the wall of a house, if it's not a bayis sasum dino kekevet, I don't become tummy. So what is he talking about? And if this is the wall of the house, Danny, and I have a hole over here, there's no roof over it. Whenever they made a hole for light to come in, they did not do it under where some of the roof overhung, because that would diminish the light. So how is it shaykh even for tumah to go out if I go over the hole, anywhere over this hole? Because since the tumah is going out, if I become the oil, I become tamei, and anything underneath me becomes tamei. I lean over. That means under me, in the wall, is this little opening. Or if I put a keli over it. Or if I leaned now a oil on this wall, all of it is that the oil is going over this little opening, oil. Because the Rambam has to write these scenarios because again, the wall of the house is not tummy. He's showing you what's the shot, the practical application of it. How do you know what this window was made for? That's the rule, guys. Any wall in between two rooms, we will never say that's going back to the end of Halacha Yud Gimel. Why didn't you say that if the net has an opening more than the pudyain, it's a problematic? Because we're speaking about in between two rooms. People would only make these little windows if the other side of the wall is open. They wouldn't even have a little bit of a roof going over it. They would have it completely open to the heavens. Halacha beis. An opening happened by itself. Again, malachas either means that some salt corroded it, or the earth created this opening. There was a chaloin, but the chaloin was halachically closed, sealed, and that pikak naturally fell out. In other words, it wasn't made with a kavanah. So how do you know what it was made for? That's the question. Do we view it like the tefach by tefach, or is it the din of the oida? And now the nishbara. So the Rambam is going to introduce now the third shiur. Tefach by tefach. The other one is much smaller if it was made for light. And now we're learning about an opening that was not made by human beings. There, the shir has to be much more than a tefach by a tefach. How much does it have to be? The size of a fist. Now people are saying, you're talking that's a tefach. No. If we learned this in the Gemara, there was a guy called Ben Batiach. Ben Batiach was a giant. His fist was the size of a head of a large person. All right? That's a much bigger opening. In other words, the moment it was not made by a human being, or even if there was a window made by a human being, but that was sealed, and the seal broke by itself, you have to have Moloi Egroif, which is Vukeroish Godol Adam. Oh, it's I don't mean to say a big head, I mean to say a head of an adult, not of a minor. My head is much bigger than a tefach by a tefach. Now, when do we say that this opening that happened by itself has to have this largest share? Even though it's a tefach by a tefach, it won't be maybe a satuma. That's if after the opening happened by itself, no one then had a, wow, how great is it? Now that I have an opening, I'm going to use it l'tashmish. That machshava designation will change the status. So no one had machshava. Even though I didn't make the window, now you go back to the normal share of a tefach by tefach. Furthermore, if there is a hole that happened by itself, but now that there's a little hole in the wall, the guy says, wow, how great is it? Now I have natural light. Chashav olav l'ma'or. So then you make the shear even less, is considered an opening. Because shahamachshava kan kim maisem. Halacha gimel. Another thing. You have a chalayin ha'asal la'oid.
So it's all about the owner's intent.
Yes.
To decide what he's going to use.
Yes. Now let's go for it. You have an opening that was made l'moed. He's not saying that it only has to be small. You had a big window, but it was made for sunlight. And the person is doing an action through which he or she is showing that they don't want this anymore. How do they show that? They begin to close it. We're speaking about closing it. Again, don't think about a window with glass plane. We're speaking about you're closing a window opening, meaning you're filling it up with cement. You're filling it up with material. And you ran out of the material. Or you had enough material, but you saw your friend going by. You didn't see for a long time. You just went to schmooze with him. Or it got Shabbos, got to stop working. The point is that you did an action showing that you don't want this opening, but you still left an opening. And another shear, it's almost a fourth shear. Height of 2 fingers, width of a gudol, then maybe a satuma. Since you did a maisa that shows you want to make it sasum, it's already considered sasum. Even though it was lechatchila made lema'od, which means right now it's much bigger than the putyain, still it's no longer going to be maybe a satum. Allah and Dalit. Chalain gadol ha'asal la'od. And it's a big window, but it was made, you didn't need that size, but it was large. And it was covered by lattice. It was covered by a screen. So what? Maybe a satuma. But when we learned at the end of Perek Yud Gimel, all these types of screens. So what did the Rambam say? That if it has a poseyach tefach, no, if this is a window made lema'or, the shear that we have to look for is not the poseyach tefach, it's the shear of a putyan. If you have very small holes, that was kavan, that was your screen. I don't think the area, right, it's not to allow a mosquito. So if it ain't it's amazing. Even though sunlight goes through it, I don't care for this thing. That's called harei zukistuma. This is mamash screen. And as we learned in Perek Yud Gimel, that was the chaytzitzin v'loy meviin. If it's made latashmish, guys, what's the shear? Tefach by a tefach. Sevachos or the fafos. So then maybe you might see. And the Geloy La'aver means that we presume that since on the other side of the wall there isn't a room, that isn't their only room, there isn't even an overhang of the roof, that these openings are there to bring light in the environment. So now the shear is a chamor dikashir. It's very little. Pudyan. Shir the pudyan. The pnei she'eina asuya elo la'oida kamay she'amarnu. Even though if you don't know, well, how do you know? That's the way, that's the rule. Now, the moment you build a bias outside of it, so now you don't allow for this opening to function properly to bring in natural light. The nases chaloin zu tachas tikra, and this little hole is under the roof of this outer home, like we mentioned. Do we say that it creates an oil for anything underneath it? Not anymore if it doesn't have the size of a tefach. But here you have no machshava then. These types of structures automatically change the status of whether the opening is lamoy, whether the opening is latashmish. And now if the opening doesn't have a pesach tefach, it will not be moitzei satum. And now look at the final. If you have a little hole, the guys in the wall, but you don't put it in the bottom, you put it high up. And on the other side of this wall, you built a new structure and you put the oil, the tent, the cover, the roof in middle of the height of the hole. So now there is some of the hole underneath it through which not enough natural light goes for you to consider this an opening for light. And you have another part of the hole above it, which that light also goes into the room. So that same opening, half and half, it changes the status. So we say, part of that opening that's under the roof, now that it's covered with a roof over it, it no longer is going to be considered an opening with the size of a pudyon. You need to have a pesach tefach. And if it doesn't have that size, tumah will not go underneath it. But the same hole, same opening, the part of it that's above the tikra, which is outside this wall, you continue with the shir of a pudyon because it's still golol la'avir. Halachivav. Let's go further. If there's a hole in the door, so why is there a hole there? So okay, it must be that the hole was not made with kavanah. Happens many times. In other words, you have a board. The intent was probably to stop it up, but you didn't stop it up. But the board that you used for the door has a lock in it. Or again, these are not our doors. Our doors fit. You know what? You come to the shul over here. Some of the doors don't fit. What happens when you have a door that even after you close the door, there's some space in between? Or even more. You have, let's say, a double door. And when you close both doors, yeah, the kavanah is for them to close off the area. But no, you're not the best carpenter. You went to yeshiva, you didn't go to a carpentering school. And when you close both doors, there's space in between the two doors. So again, does that close one bias from the other or not? And therefore, when you have this double door, or you close the door, but the wind blew it open. In all of these cases, in halacha vav, what shear are we going to be looking for? I know that we had that unusual 2 etzba'ayim by Goydel, Roich of Godel. I'm not counting. We're going to the 3 shiurim, the 3 main shiurim. The tefach al tefach, the smaller shear of a pudyon, and the larger shear in halacha beis, right? If it happened naturally of this, the size of an egroif, which is really the size of a head of an adult, it goes to the last one, which is a very lenient size. In other words, if it doesn't have that shear, it's chaytzitz. Or more, even though you close the double doors, still. But if it was less than this larger share of an egroy, this is a big leniency, then we consider it sasum. And this chapter's final halacha zayin, you make a hole in the wall. But why did you make that hole? You didn't do it for you to use it to bring stuff from one environment to the other. You didn't do it for light to come in. You did it because you're planning to build something and you made a hole for you to put a nail in. Or, this is interesting. People have it today in the front doors, whatever that's called. You have a little lechele. Now, by the way, nowadays it's closed with glass. We're speaking about no, it was open. If you made a little hole to speak, in all of these cases, it falls into the category of a chaloin ha'asali tashmish, because that's called tashmish. And the little hole can put you and won't do it. Tashmish, tefach al tefach. The shura, it's called a poiseyach tefach.
Is it a egroif for tefach?
No. Egroif means the fist. That's why the Chazal say the fist of Ben Botiach. Ben Botiach was a giant. Botiach was someone in the times of Chazal that was so big that his fist was the size of an adult head.
When you say tefach, it's the size.
I know. Okay, that's it. So now we had the type of chatzitza between environments. And we're not done with the sugya. God willing, tomorrow's first chapter on Shabbos, we're going to continue with this din of the chaloin in between two